When Judge Andrew Napolitano tried to silence Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, he thought it would end the debate. Instead, it lit the match to one of the most unforgettable political showdowns in recent memory. It began with the kind of arrogance we've seen too many times before. A powerful man, cloaked in the authority of years on the bench, leaning on his title and reputation to drown out a voice he didn't want the public to hear. The courtroom habits followed him to the debate stage. Interrupt, dismiss, control. That's how Napolitano had always held the upper hand. But this time, he wasn't facing a timid opponent. He was facing Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas who had built her career not by bowing to authority, but by staring it down. From her earliest days as a civil rights attorney to her rise in Washington, Crockett had never been one to step aside quietly. And on this night, her voice carried the weight of every immigrant family, every working-class voter, every silenced woman who had ever been told to wait her turn. The exchange began innocently enough, with Crockett laying out her argument. But before she could finish her point, Napolitano's voice cut in, sharp, commanding, dripping with the authority of someone who believed his word was final. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on him, calm but fierce, as if to say, "Not this time." This wasn't just another debate moment. It was a collision of two Americas. On one side, the old guard men who had spent their careers unchallenged, their words treated as gospel. On the other, the new generation, unapologetic, unafraid, and unwilling to let anyone dictate when their voices could be heard. And that's what made what happened next so electric. The room held its breath. Cameras zoomed in. Social media timelines lit up as viewers realized they were watching something bigger than politics. They were watching a shift, a crack in the armor of authority, a moment that could only end one way, with someone walking away diminished. Because what Crockett said next didn't just stop Napolitano, it left him completely exposed. It was more than a debate. It was a clash of eras, tradition versus transformation, authority versus defiance. On one side stood Judge Andrew Napolitano, a man whose career stretched back decades, whose every word carried the weight of legal authority. He was polished, practiced, and comfortable in the role of arbiter. To his supporters, he was the voice of order and restraint, a steady hand in a world they believed was spinning out of control. Years of commentary had trained him to seize the narrative, to dominate with legal jargon, to brush aside challenges as if they were beneath his station. He represented an old guard that thrived on commanding the room and keeping dissent in check. But across from him stood a very different kind of opponent. Jasmine Crockett, young, fiery, and absolutely unapologetic. She hadn't come from the safe halls of establishment politics. She'd risen through the trenches of civil rights battles, defending communities too often ignored. She didn't carry the smooth, practiced cadence of someone rehearsed in appeasement. She carried the raw edge of someone who had lived the struggles she spoke about. To her, debate wasn't theater. It was survival. It was speaking truth where silence had once been the rule. This wasn't just two individuals preparing to argue. It was an entire generational and cultural divide laid bare. Napolitano, a figure of authority whose voice echoed the past, embodied the comfort of power speaking down to those it deemed lesser. Crockett, a voice for the marginalized, embodied the frustration of people who were done waiting to be heard. The energy in the room before their exchange could almost be felt in the air. Viewers tuning in knew who Napolitano was, the man who could silence opponents with a single wave of the hand. But many were still learning who Crockett was, and that in itself was part of the drama. Because the very second she opened her mouth, she wasn't just another congresswoman on the stage. She was a disruptor, the kind of voice that made audiences lean forward and whisper, "Who is she? And why have I not heard her like this before?" Napolitano relied on polish. Crockett thrived on passion. He spoke as though the law was a shield that could not be pierced. She spoke as though justice was a fire that could not be contained. He carried the certainty of someone who had always been heard. She carried the urgency of someone who knew what it meant to fight for the mic. And it was in that contrast that the inevitability of collision became obvious. Two figures, two Americas, staring each other down across the divide. one used to winning by control. The other determined to win by refusing to be controlled. The debate could have been polite, even predictable, if Crockett had played by Napolitano's rules. But she had no interest in playing. From the moment she stepped onto that stage, there was only one outcome. She sought to speak fully, to speak fiercely, and to refuse to yield to the interruptions and dismissals that had silenced so many before her. The crowd sensed it. The cameras captured it. Online, the anticipation grew with every passing second. People weren't just watching for politics. They were watching for a moment. The kind of moment that cracks history open and shows which way the wind is blowing and when their worlds collided. The tension didn't just spark, it exploded. It started as a simple disagreement, but within seconds, the stage had turned into a battlefield. Judge Andrew Napolitano leaned forward, the familiar tone of command in his voice. He cut in just as Jasmine Crockett was mid-sentence, raising his hand slightly, as if to physically stop her words from hanging in the air. His voice sharpened, carrying the weight of decades on the bench. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," he began, "your interpretation of constitutional law is fundamentally flawed." The framers never intended he didn't finish, because Crockett wasn't yielding. She didn't shrink back, didn't pause, didn't even blink. Her eyes narrowed, steady and unflinching, and with a deliberate calm she shot back. "Judge, you've had a lifetime to interpret the Constitution your way. Now it's time you hear it from someone who lives the consequences of your interpretation." The audience gasped. The tension was instantaneous, thick enough to feel in the chest. For Napolitano, this was supposed to be routine, a reminder of his authority, quick flecks of legal jargon to show his dominance. But Crockett had met him not with hesitation, but with precision. Napolitano, unwilling to let go, tried again. He launched into the comfort of legal language, citing precedent, invoking the framers, wrapping himself in the armor of centuries-old text. His words were polished, confident, designed to sound untouchable. "The law is not about feelings," he insisted, voice rising above the room. "It's about precedent. It's about order. It's about structure. Without it, society collapses." Crockett didn't wait for the gavel to fall. She struck with her own authority. Her tone was sharp, but never chaotic. "Order without justice is oppression. Structure without equity is just a cage. And precedent. Precedent has been used to deny people who look like me, who pray like me, who love like me, the very rights you claim to defend." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others shouted. Online clips of the exchange were already bouncing across timelines. Comments poured in. "She's eating him alive." Finally, someone who won't let him steamroll. "This is the shift we've been waiting for." Napolitano raised his voice again, a note of frustration slipping through his carefully constructed persona. He tried to overtalk, pressing his authority harder, as though sheer volume could reassert his dominance. But every time he tried to cut in, Crockett's words landed sharper, faster, with a rhythm that made it impossible to ignore. What made the moment so electric wasn't just the words themselves. It was the contrast in delivery. Napolitano clung to his title, his bench, his years in the establishment. Crockett spoke as if she had nothing to lose and everything to prove. He invoked the past. She demanded the future. The audience was on edge. The moderator struggled to keep control, but it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't a debate by traditional standards. It was a showdown. And everyone watching knew it. Social media flared like a wildfire. Hashtags with Crockett's name climbed into the trending list. Viewers replayed the footage in real time, dissecting every interruption, every comeback, every flash of emotion on their faces. It wasn't just a debate. It was a performance. Crockett was delivering the lines that would echo far beyond the room. Napolitano leaned back for a moment, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. He adjusted his notes, shuffled his papers, and then leaned in once more, attempting to regain control. "Congresswoman, rhetoric does not change the law. You cannot bend reality to fit your ideals." Crockett tilted her head slightly, a smile tugging at her lips. And with the calm of someone who knew exactly how her words would land, she delivered the line that silenced the room. and then one line from Crockett. Just 12 words long, flipped the entire exchange upside down. The cracks were starting to show. And for the first time, the judge looked shaken, up until now. Judge Andrew Napolitano had relied on the armor he'd worn his entire career: authority, composure, and the controlled cadence of someone used to commanding the room. But the debate with Jasmine Crockett wasn't following his script. Every time he leaned on precedent, she countered with lived reality. Every time he raised his voice, she raised the stakes. The rhythm he was used to, interruption, dominance, silence,